Wow, we have a group of powerhouse women here with us today on the podcast. I'm so excited for this conversation. I'm going to start things off by just having everyone go around and give like your 2-minute elevator pitch of who you are, what you do, and just introducing yourself to everybody. So let's start with Amée.
Oh, good. I get to kick it all off. I'm Amée Quiriconi, and I'm actually an author and a business consultant. I work with organizations and business leaders to bridge their business strategy with their hiring, their employee engagement, and creating basically toxic-free cultures. And my emphasis is on trauma-informed practices. I have a lot of experience with addressing, trauma in our lives and things like that. And I'm also the author. I have a book called The Fearless Woman's Guide to Starting a Business: What Every Woman Needs to Know to Be a Courageous, Authentic, and Unstoppable Entrepreneur. And it's basically a trauma-informed look at women and our roles with entrepreneurship and business. And so that's me in my 2-minute nutshell.
Love it. Thanks, Amée. How about you, Rachel?
Thanks. Yeah, my name is Rachel Wynn, and I am based out of Washington, D.C. I have a company called Starlight Social, a social media company, and I also have a new coaching practice where I help feminist entrepreneurs really learn how to build and balance and scale ethical businesses. So I'm really excited to be joining you all today.
Yay. Okay, and Melanie?
Hey y'all, I am Melanie Childers, and I am also a feminist entrepreneur coach, helping women be bad bitches in their business and take up all the space and make smart, scalable, powerful business decisions that help them create the sustainable growth that they want for the life of their business without hustling or burning out.
So good. Just from the quick intros, I'm like, this is going to be such a juicy conversation. So one thing that I noticed is that none of you described yourself as a girl boss or a fempreneur or a CEO. Why is that? Who wants to start?
I throw this out there. I don't have an issue when people do use that and they attach that label to it. So I want to make sure that, my choices to not use it aren't, in any way shaming anybody that actually does. I have worked in male dominated fields for like half of my career in blue collar industries, and then also worked in pink collar careers. And, I know that sometimes there can be a stigma because, the word, adding the she or the her or the whatever to it, like it can make it feel like that it's a unicorn. And I think all of us here have enough experience in business, and our what we're trying to do in business is to make sure that women who succeed are not just unicorns, but are in the same dynamic, same playing field as everybody else there. And so, that's why I just don't attach it. Although I do focus on women, I focus on women being successful in the larger field of business and entrepreneurship, rather than just in the niche field of being the shepreneur, the, whatever, words you want to attach onto it. So that's my 2 cents on it.
Anyone else?
Yeah,
Rachel.
Sure. So yeah, I personally really don't like the terms like girl boss, because I think that using gender qualifiers really kind of negates the power that women have when they're business owners. And I just really, it's just kind of like, have you ever heard of like a boy boss? I mean, no. So I personally really don't like those terms, and hope that it seems as though there is a shift in this kind of Bali babe and girl boss kind of industry, that they are starting to shift away from that language. And I just hope that we continue to make those steps, because it just feels very, I don't know, patronizing, I feel like. I mean, if someone wants to identify as such, that's their personal choice, but it's something that I am really not into.
I'm the same. Like, I feel like it's a little bit diminutive. Like, it's like, oh, that's so cute. Look at her being a girl boss. And it's like, there's nothing cute about me over here. I mean, yes, I'm cute, but like what I am doing is not cute. Growing a multiple $1 million business is not cute. It feels patronizing. And at the same time, I'm like, if that's the hashtag that you want to use, go for it. If that's what you identify with, go for it. It's just not for me.
Yeah, I find it interesting because most of the people that use those terms are women. It's not usually men going, oh, look at that girl boss over there. It's like, even when I am hiring, so many of the applications that come in, and we ask, like, why do you want to work for Kate Kordsmeyer, the company? And people always say, oh, I'm just so inspired by what a girl boss she is. I mean, I get so many of that. I'm like, I know you're saying it as a compliment, and you do, but it's interesting that it's like, it's the women that are upholding this patronizing term. So yeah, I think this leads us to our next topic, which is really the overarching topic of this entire panel. What does smashing the patriarchy mean? I know this is a mission of all of ours. And so I have some specific questions for each of you kind of with regards to smashing the patriarchy. So Melanie, let's start with you, because you specifically help women disrupt their internalized patriarchy. So what does that mean?
So what that really means to me is that the external culture has created like all of these norms that we're supposed to live by, that don't be too loud or too smart or too sexy or not sexy enough. And like there's this perfect little box that you're supposed to fit in. And then we absorb all of that just from growing up with it in the culture, from media, from magazine covers, commercials, people that we see portrayed in TV and film. And so I think we just accidentally, by default, this is what brains do, is they absorb the culture that we're in. And so we suddenly have all of these thoughts about who we're supposed to be and how we're supposed to look and how we're supposed to operate. And what I find that happens for most of my clients is that we tend to keep ourselves small to not bust out of this box, because there is punishment involved. You will be criticized. You will be slandered. You will be raked over the coals. You will be judged. And that is like the number one fear of most humans, is that we don't want that light to be shining on us and to feel the humiliation and shame of when you step out of the box. And so my work really is, we have to mess up all of that and start really standing in your power, on your own confidence, in your own belief in yourself, no matter what the world has to say.
Yeah, so true. And this reminds me, and kind of leads me to Amée, the question that I have for you, because you've talked about how it's your achievements that make you a valuable and knowledgeable teacher. It's not your achievements, sorry, that make you a valuable and knowledgeable
Those help.
teacher. Yeah, it's your failures. And you said that you learned that you were the architect behind your self-sabotage, which I have a feeling is similar to what Melanie just shared. So how is talk about that, and how this realization in itself is kind of an act against the patriarchy.
Well, the biggest thing was, as Melanie points out, we do absorb a lot, and some of it actually our parents also absorbed, the messages and the traditions and the stereotypes. And as I was going through my own life and running my own companies, and then finding myself at the bottom of the the next wave, crashing down, realizing that I was replicating, in a lot of different ways, these messages and belief systems. And what was interesting was, outwardly being like, you can see me now, like tattoos, short hair, nose ring. I've been like this for 20 some years running my own companies and, kind of bucking the system. And so I never had this belief that I was in the trap. And it was only after seeing the results of it, of financial problems, relationship problems, picking bad business partner problems, I was replaying some of these systems in my head at a subconscious level. And that was the waking up to that, of like, sometimes you need a coach or a book or, a slap in the face to let you see, really what's going on. And it's easy to blame the system, but the system is us as well, until we know we're in the system playing by those rules and enforcing those rules. And, it's like Melanie said, like, when we do keep ourselves contained because we fear the microaggressions and the backlash, and some of it's very real. Women do see a reduction in their value in terms of their salary, their compensation, their promotions, bonuses, all of that, if they don't play in the box. And, in many ways, that's what drove me to become an entrepreneur, was I got to create my box, and I thought I had, but then found that even then I was still in a box and still playing that role. And that's what was, causing me again to come down at the bottom of a wave and then have to rebuild back, all over again. And it's pretty, we as women, have, I'd say we have a lot of hurdles against us, but they're not insurmountable. But there is this balance between, I'm going to hold myself accountable for this. I can't keep saying that, men are a-holes and, and that whatever, whatever the problem actually is, gender gap, that's what the problem is. And that's why I don't make enough money. I mean, there's an accountability on all of our shoulders to actually see it and then change it and do something about it and get really angry about it enough to want to be able to change it for ourselves, because we are kind of delaying a future that we're all entitled to have. We just have never been told that we're entitled to that future, So that's, where my passion is in that.
Yeah. So I have some follow-up questions for that. But before we get there, I know, Rachel, I want to ask you too. You specifically help women become feminist founders. So what does that mean? And what does feminism mean to you in 2021? I think this is a term that is often misunderstood. And sometimes saying you're a feminist can have a very negative connotation to a lot of people. And the word itself, I think, has changed meaning over the last few decades. So I'd love to hear what a feminist founder means to you.
Yeah, to me, it's really all about understanding that feminism is it's actually not as much of an identity, but kind of an ongoing learning process. And I think that what's really important about today's feminism is that it, of course, includes men. One thing that does kind of surprise me, though, and I've talked to a lot of different feminist entrepreneurs, trying to actually find men in business who identify as feminists. And I so far, I've only found one, which is pretty crazy. But I think that what's really important about feminism today, and especially incorporating it into your business, is ensuring that the way that you're running a business is done in an ethical way that's really focused on not just the hustle, profit worshiping, and is instead making an impact in some way. I actually have on my website, feministfounder.com/my feminist agenda. I actually have a whole long list of what it means to be a feminist founder. And I think that a lot of that has really been my ongoing process of learning what that really means. It took me a while to kind of identify, what does my feminism mean to me? And I think it's really, of course, it's a choice for everybody, but for me, it's taking my political identity and incorporating that into my work. I'm a democratic socialist, and I, of course, am someone who really cares about equality for all. I believe in healthcare for all, etc. But I think that it's taking action steps that are beyond kind of the norm. So it's making your website accessible, it's making your content accessible. It's believing that you don't have to compromise your life for the sake of your business. I think that a lot of business owners, and I did this myself, in the beginning, they're really hustling. And then all of a sudden you're exhausted. And it's just what is all this for? I became an entrepreneur because, for me, I became an entrepreneur because I wanted to have freedom. I wanted to be able to have control over my day and to really be able to be untied and untethered from a computer. But it's so easy to kind of fall into that 9-to-5 trap because that's what we've been sort of taught. So I think for me, feminism is really making sure that, understanding that capitalism, I think that's what's really interesting too about being a feminist entrepreneur. And I'm sure Melanie can probably agree, is that, especially for me, I'm a feminist, I'm a democratic socialist, but technically I'm a capitalist. And that's, a really interesting kind of identity to navigate. And I think that it's really identifying what that means and breaking free from a lot of those pre-prescribed notions of what it means to be a woman in business, especially a feminist in business. And one resource I actually wanted to shout out that's been really helpful in guiding me to this kind of understanding of who I am and how I incorporate my business is there's a company called Sister, and it's by Jennifer Armbrust, and she has an amazing diagram of the feminine economy. She has a diagram that shows the masculine economy, which is typically like based on kind of masculine energy principles, not male, but like masculine energy. So hustle, focusing on profit, that kind of thing. And then she offers an alternative, which is the feminine economy. And that's been so helpful for me to learn and understand, because it's more based on sort of feminine energy, again, not female or woman based, but flow, collaboration, nurturing, and it's just really shifted how I run my business, as well as how I see myself as a business owner.
Yeah. Okay. That's awesome. We'll link that in the show notes so anybody listening can go check out the diagram. I feel like visuals are always really helpful to be like, oh, that's what you mean. So you each shared so many things that I'm like, if this was an individual episode, I would have a million follow-up questions right away for y'all. But I'm going to kind of bounce around here a little bit so that we can get to some of the other topics, and we're going to come back to some of the things you each shared. So something that came up for me, though, as all of you were talking, is that there's often, I think, this misconception, and I've heard it from people who I know support women and equity and still are kind of critical or skeptical of, or even triggered by words like the patriarchy. And people who are skeptical of patriarchy or other systems of oppression or discrimination, even if they can acknowledge that, yeah, those things exist, sometimes people seem to feel like dwelling on it is going to make you a victim. And we all just need to like pull ourselves up by our bootstraps and do our best and, system be damned. What would you say to those kinds of skeptics?
This is something that I actually do touch on and I've talked about with other people. And, again, this is why my lens is the trauma-informed perspective, because, when those words are triggering, there's a story underneath that's worth examining. And I think that when we don't, open ourselves up to hearing the other side, right? I mean, all these changes require listening on everybody's part, right? And that means that when and I've had this conversation, I'll say this particularly with men, especially it started to erupt a lot when the Me Too movement happened a couple of years ago. And I started getting feedback through my show and through personal messages from men that felt like they wanted to hear really what they'd been missing all along when it came to assault and aggression, towards women, the comments, I'll air quote this for the listeners, the jokes about in the locker room talk and things like that. Like they didn't know where they were going wrong, but they felt unsafe with being able to raise those questions in a public dialogue or even in a meeting to discuss it, because when you've been victimized by something, it's easy to want to push back against your perpetrator and to easily bucket everybody into that role, white males, all bad. And so when we simplify messages down to and distill them down to just, buckets of categories of people, and we throw in too many people that really aren't in there or don't belong in there, but they're too afraid, just like we were talking about, like women in general, like it's too afraid to pull out of the box. And so we keep ourselves contained in that box because we don't have enough psychological safety. And so when we're addressing things like this, that's why, again, I come back to it's important for all of us to understand where those beliefs may come from. And sometimes we have to have those reflective conversations with ourselves. Why is that word triggering for me? Why does it bother me to be accused, of behaving patriarchally? Anybody want to correct me on the pronunciation? Why do I feel conflicted and triggered and uncomfortable, with that? And sometimes a person who's been, victimized by the system, I think has to sit there and give some safety for that person to be able to say, like, listen, I feel like this word bothers me because, and let them be vulnerable in return. And I think that's how you begin to make that headway. And so, we have big challenges ahead of us, not just in the patriarchy, but also in racism and with gender bias. And how do we rewrite these rules? And it's too scary sometimes to challenge our belief systems, especially if we didn't mean any harm. And I think that's the biggest thing is by, our human nature is not to hurt each other, it's to connect with one another. And if we find that that dissonance that we have actually hurt somebody through our lack of information or our behaviors and our actions, and we didn't mean to, we all become frightened children. I didn't mean to do that. I'm sorry I didn't do that. And whatever our survival mechanism drilled into us that we know what it is what we end up seeing. And we end up really basically fighting against each other's fearful inner child, and that's not woo-woo. That's just really the way, the neurobehavior and the neuroscience comes down to. So I don't want to gobble up too much time because I want to hear Melanie and Rachel to be able to talk to it. But like I said, that's why I niche myself into one area, which is if you're having difficulties with that, let's take the trauma-informed look at that. Let's understand what our histories and experiences are that have contributed to all of us playing the role in it, and how we can all safely break that role and allow others to safely break out of their role. I mean, I think that's the other part of this as well, is if we're going to make our changes, we have to also have willingness and grace to let other people do it in the way that they have to be able to do it. And that's authentic to them.
Yeah, so true. And I've got chills a couple times when you were speaking. And I think this is also patriarchal thinking of black or white, and that it's one extreme or the other. And you're either an outright misogynist like Trump, or you are innocent completely. And it's like, there's so much nuance and gray area in between. And it's the same thing I think that we saw, especially this last year with racism, and feeling like you're either in the KKK or you're not racist, and there's no middle ground. And now that we're dealing with the nuance, and nuance is really hard because good people can uphold systems that don't serve everybody and maybe don't even serve themselves. And I do think it's been really hard for a lot of us to really look at our role in that.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well, and we haven't been taught those nuances.
Right.
That's one of the first steps of learning the nuance is, again, it comes down to safety. We all end up, our default function is to protect ourselves and survive. That's it, right? Like, we will stop eating, we will stop doing lots of things if it means we have to have all of the resources available to survive this. And then once we're in a safe zone, then our next default is to connect, to actually energetically, empathetically, and relationally connect with other people. And if you can't get to the safe zone first, and to recognize safety is to recognize what we all truly fear. And it's not just one thing, it's multiple things that, cause fear and anxiety in all of us, that make us feel like, and if you have more trauma, which about half of us do have fear systems based on traumatic experiences as children, whether they were neglect or abuse, or just, a working mom who was never home and we had to take care of ourselves, all those things actually contribute to that. And so we don't have models of learning how to do that. And I think, to me, that's the big shift that we're seeing, is we're recognizing how much gray area there really is. And we all need to start learning how to do that. And so then we need educators willing to be able to show and teach people how to start to do that, so that we can, put it into place today, teach it to our children, and then they can teach it to their children, and so on and so forth.
Yeah. Melanie, Rachel, anything to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to comment on the whole, like, pull yourself up by the bootstraps. We don't need to look at it, because if we do, we'll be a victim of it. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of like saying, I know that, the matrix exists and we're in it, but, let's just power through. And it comes back to what Amée was saying, is that, like, this is internal, and we have to do things externally, because this is a broader system. It's not just a belief pattern. It's also, that belief pattern shows up in the way that people get hired, in the way that people are given money for their businesses, or whether or not they apply for business loans. It shows up literally everywhere. And like, we can look at elections, we can look at, real estate and redlining and all of this. Like, it's literally in everything. And so you can't just power through. You have to change what's happening inside your brain, inside yourself, and you have to work to change what's happening outside, so that, like, we have to be outside of the matrix in order to bring it down.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think a lot of people feel like there's been so much progress in a lot of these areas. And so, okay, we're done. Like, things are better, so stop whining. And and there's like this sense that, again, I think it does come back to that kind of either or extreme thinking of black and white, of, like, well, there's some women that have been successful, so if they could do it, then all women should be able to do it. And so sexism doesn't really exist and the patriarchy isn't real. And yeah, I think I go back to Amée's point of like, why are you so triggered by this? Why is this so hard for you to look at? There's probably something deeper there, and it's not really that you think everything's gravy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and, and the thing is that, when people have been able to achieve some levels of success, again, we have to go back to, were they fortified in other ways? Were they fortified with, being taught resilience and being able to overcome, were they fortified with a support system around them in a network that financially helped them or it, emotionally, helped them? There's a lot of evidence for people that when they are able to achieve success, they didn't just do it alone and it wasn't just a fluke, that there are contributors that help achieve success. And then there are also, some of those, things that help achieve success can be very unfair to somebody else. And so, you can't just say one person made it, therefore everybody else should be able to make it. I mean, again, that's that lack of that nuance of understanding that, what it's going to take for each of us to get to the pinnacle that we seek is going to be highly dependent on who we are, what we're working with in terms of our toolbox and the skills that we need to be able to, evolve and develop in ourselves and also make sure that, again, like Melanie said, that the system isn't already maligned against us, that we don't have, bigger hurdles to have to jump over. And in some cases with women, I think, women are driven to entrepreneurship only because they're sick and tired of the hurdles that exist in the system. So it's just like, screw the hurdles. I'm just going to get out of it altogether. And that's the leap out into building up your own business and your own economy, because you're able to say, listen, if I can't make it work inside this company that I'm at or this industry, then I'm just going to throw it all away and just start over. And I think that that's beautiful and brilliant, to just say, I'm not going to accept it anymore. I'm just going to do it myself. So,
yeah. Well, one of those hurdles that I think all women deal with is something that Rachel, you talk about, which is the invisible labor. And that's whether you're working in corporate or you're an entrepreneur or you're a stay-at-home mom or whatever it could be in between. So can you tell us a little bit about what is invisible labor and kind of how we can, cross that hurdle?
Sure. And I want to clarify first, there's two different terms kind of floating around right now, which is emotional labor and invisible labor. So I always like to distinguish that those are actually two very different things. Emotional labor was a term coined by Arlie Hochschild, and she was describing that as the management of feelings and kind of expectations. So think more about back in the day, like, the smiling bank teller or the polite stewardess, kind of managing the feelings of their patrons. So that's kind of what she was talking about. Invisible labor is really different because it's basically the endless to-do lists that run in the back of your head to run a household or to raise a family. It's a lot of the intangible things that happen in a household. So for example, it's not cleaning the toilet. It's remembering that the toilet needs to be clean. It's making sure that there's a toilet cleaner, et cetera, et cetera. It's like all the kind of like mini steps that are invisible to get things done. And I think the reason why it's such a problem is that it's been systemically falling on women. And it's just really unfortunate, especially for women in business or women who are entrepreneurs, working women, because they're kind of expected to, come home from work and then do this kind of second shift of all this type, all the kind of household and child rearing, because by default, it's been put on women. One thing that I like to point out, especially since we're in a global pandemic where women are being pushed and shoved out of the workplace, especially due to childcare, is that in 1940, so actually a little bit of context. So in World War II, men were going overseas to fight, and that left women back at home with kids. But the United States needed people working in factories and things like that. So women were expected to work. And so then the big question is, well, what do we do with these kids? And so in 1940, something called the Lanham Act passed. And it's really mind-blowing, but basically back then, a woman could go to work, take her kids to a free childcare, and at the end of her shift, pick up her kids, pick up a bag of groceries that they had prepared, and then go home, make dinner, and be with her family. So to me, it's really insane because, of course, that ended once the war was over. But it's just an example that the government completely has the power to make being a working woman or non-binary person possible. They just choose not to because they want to. It's all about, the patriarchy, when it comes down to it, in my view, is the oppression of women and denying them access to power. And I think that's just a really good example of how there is the capacity to take off some of the pressure of being a working parent. But that's just not something that's talked about nowadays. There is something called a Marshall Plan for Moms that's been going around, where there's a petition to basically have an emergency kind of situation to help parents and families in this pandemic. But it just makes me really sad that there's not more aggressive legislation going forward to make this problem better. The invisible labor is something that even on a smaller scale. So for example, I have a partner and he works full-time at a nonprofit. And because I'm an entrepreneur making less money than he is, I tend to fall, and this is very common, I tend to fall into this trap of, oh, well, he's bringing in more income, so I should do more around the house. But, that's something that is really kind of insidious because it's downplaying your power as a business owner. It's equally important to be spending my time working and generating revenue and making change and helping people than doing the laundry during the day. So of course this pandemic has thrown everything up in the air and people are working from home and whatnot. But I think what's really important is to ensure that there's an equal division of labor in the home. And that includes all these kind of smaller micro steps. Because if there's any parents out there listening, that if you sign your child up, like your daughter or son up for ballet, it's not just like sign up for ballet. There's a ton of other things associated with that. You need to find the registration forms, check the schedule to see what fits in their schedule, buy the ballet outfit and the ballet shoes, maybe try to meet the teacher, make sure it's a good fit, and figure out like a carpool situation or transportation. There's just so many steps involved in so many kind of like chores that just really aren't seen. And so therefore they're not measured. And it just really falls on the shoulders of women.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And it's such like a self-fulfilling prophecy, particularly for entrepreneurs. I've had so many friends who have started a business and then, they'll say, well, my husband's making more money. And so I'm going to, it doesn't make sense for me to take time to work on the weekends or whatever it might be, because he's making more money. And so he needs me to be with the kids. I'm like, well, your business is never going to make more money if you continue to say, well, I can't work on it because it's not making enough money. And so it's just this vicious cycle that we get trapped in. So if for those listening who do have a partner, how can we ensure the division of household and invisible labor is equitable?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And I think that it kind of depends on the dynamic of the relationship and whether there's someone who really likes lists. I'm someone who loves lists and spreadsheets and things like that. So this might sound a little extreme, but basically what so I do consulting on this topic. So I work with couples and individuals who want to learn more about invisible labor. I do events around this. And what I recommend is making a master list of all the chores you can think of that are specific to your household and include the invisible labor type items in that list. And then basically, and this is the funny part, I think, and I think what's really made it work is to go through, make a copy of that list. So there's 2 versions. And then separately from your partner, you go through and you rank each item as I hate this, I don't mind this chore, and I really love this chore. And then you come back together and you compare, and then you divvy it up based on what naturally makes sense. So for example, for me, my partner doesn't mind taking out the trash. I hate taking out the trash. So I haven't, in my relationship for, however many years it's been, I have not taken a single bag of trash out. He has not folded a single piece of laundry. And that works for us because I love folding laundry.
Can you come to my house? I really hate folding laundry.
Well, I like folding it, but picking it up and taking it to the closet is like another step. But I think that it's really trying to find those natural fits. And then for the things where you both hate it, having a discussion about whether you want to rotate it or if you have the privilege to outsourcing it. So one thing that has been really helpful for us is that here's an example. Back when we were living in like a 450 square foot apartment, I mean, I live in DC, and let's see, I don't want to, okay, I'm not placing any shame or blame, but because I don't like cleaning the toilet, that was my partner's job. I noticed it wasn't as clean as I was hoping when he would clean it. And I noticed some kind of cut corners and things like that. And so I was like, you know what, let's see if we can find, someone who's already coming to our building that's doing, cleaning work for other families, and see if they'll just come and just clean our toilet, which sounds kind of ridiculous. And it ended up being like the whole bathroom, but we paid $40 for someone who was already coming to our building and who was happy to just stop by and do that one task. And it really, really helped our relationship. Like, it was just one less fight that we had to deal with. And that's a huge privilege to be able to outsource, to do things like meal subscriptions, and to have a cleaning team come and help you out. But if you do have the ability to afford it, I think that some of those things can really actually help your relationship if they're something you're constantly fighting over.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I love that you share, about the micro tasks, because even something like meal subscriptions, which my family and I take advantage of quite often, but it's not just, oh, meals just showed up. It's like, I'm the one that every week I'm getting the email. It comes to my email. I'm getting the email and I'm having to decide, are we going to do it this week or not? Then I'm going to have to pick the recipes or the meals that I want. I have to make sure that the payment's all set. Like, there's so many little things that go into just something that on the outside looks like you got a meal kit delivered, like, congratulations, you want a trophy?
Yeah.
And it's like, well, yeah, because it was so much work and all these little things. But something else you brought up, and I'd be curious to hear some of the other ladies too, what you think about this, because this is something that my friends and I have talked a lot about when it comes to having that equal division of labor. A lot of times we'll do something similar, like let's go through a master list of chores, or even something a little less official, like let's just have a conversation about something that needs to get done that we're struggling with. And what's come up a lot is that, and this is a generalization, women care more about how things are done than men do. And your example of like the toilets is such a good example of that. I've had friends where they, well, I want to send certain kinds of food to school with our kids for them to eat. And the husband's like, just give him money and he can eat at the cafeteria. But because she cares more, then he's like, so it should fall on you because I'm fine to just send him here. Have y'all experienced that?
Yeah, I think so. I this is not a proud feature of my life, but I've been married a few times. And there has been some consistency in some of that. And I think it comes back to, our grooming, our social grooming and our gender grooming when we were children is, we're witnessing that as an expected behavior, as an expected outcome. We're taught that it's our responsibility to do that. And if we were, daughters in a family, sometimes we learned, by being mini mothers, on how to be able to do that. Whereas, boys are sent out to the yard and they grow up into men who, that they have a lower expectation for it. So then when it becomes something, and I would say, and I agree with you, it's an overgeneralization, because there are some men who really love to have clean bathrooms and clean toilets because it's disgusting, right? But the overall sense of, priority establishment to something like a household duty comes back to, again, the modeling and the what we've been taught. It's not like some biological difference between us. It's simply what we've been told. And if men have not been shown to take pride in household duties and the outcomes, and that there's a responsibility on their shoulders as well to do that, it's not as important to them as the other things that they were told to really, give a crap about, which could be their cars. I mean, I'm just going to throw out all the gender norms, the yard work. For every guy that I know that, couldn't clean a toilet, he was hyper vigilant about how well the lawn was cut. I mean, that's the trade-off right there, right? So yeah, I think it's less, again, the biology and more of like, what are we teaching? Why is it important today to teach, our sons, daughters, and non-binary children that, gender is not associated with what needs to be done in the house to get us up in the morning, to get us food on the table, and to get out the door and do whatever we want to do with our lives.
Yeah.
Yeah, I call it a learned helplessness. And it's something that's interesting because sometimes we can potentially blame our partners because maybe they just don't make an effort, but maybe they just really have never had the experience or know to do something. So like, for example, I remember it was like the one time I got really frustrated with my partner. I asked him to clean out the fridge. And to me, that like is very straightforward, like, you know, and so he's like, well, what do you mean by that? And I'm like, oh, okay. I was like, take everything out, wipe down all the, you know, shelves, and then put everything back in, throw out anything that's bad or old. And he's like, okay. And so I'm like working at my computer. Again, this is my older, smaller apartment. So I was like in the corner and he was in the kitchen. And so I was working. And he's like, what do I use to clean the shelves? And I was like, the cleaning spray and paper towels would be fine. He's like, oh, okay. I'm like, okay, great. Working. I'm like typing. I forgot this is a podcast. I'm like typing with my fingers in the air. And then he asked me again, he's like, you want me to take everything out of the fridge? And I was like, yes, everything. And he's like, oh, okay. And so then I'm like back to work. And he's like, how do I know something is bad? And I was like, I like freaked out. I was like, use your nose. Like, are you serious? Like, why? And I think this is a really good example because it's the kind of situation where someone, like I might just decide, you know what, I'm going to be in charge of cleaning the fridge from now on, because obviously you don't know how to do it. But, you know, when I talked to him about it, he had never cleaned out a fridge before. And that's something that I learned when I was probably like, I don't know, 8 or 9, when I was a quote unquote mother's helper, where I was taught how to clean out a fridge. And so it's interesting because, you know, sometimes they are culpable, but sometimes they really just don't know. And it's part of that invisible labor, you know, well, how has the fridge always been clean all the time? You know what I mean? And so
Fairies,
I think
right?
yeah.
Fairies and elves.
Exactly. So I think that's just a really good example that sometimes we do need to be, because we've been gendered, because I'm referring to women in heterosexual relationships, have been gendered to be the caretakers and to be the ones with their eyes open, always looking for, you know, things to pick up or clean. We've been gendered to do that. A lot of men haven't, and that creates a problem because it seems like they have this kind of like blinders on, or like they're blind to certain things. And so it's kind of, unfortunately, up to us to, you know, gently guide them into the future and to show them how to do things. And then the big thing that I argue in my invisible labor work is to then, this is the hardest thing to do, but let them do the task and be okay with it. Like when my partner started emptying out the dishwasher and putting dishes haphazardly everywhere, you know, the forks and spoons just kind of like, everything, I kind of freaked out. But then I was like, well, would I rather spend my time doing that or just have it his way? And I was like, you know what, I'd rather just not care. And so I think it's releasing control because, again, in heterosexual relationships, sometimes women do need to kind of release, well, any relationship, release the control and let their partner do it their way and just be okay with that, because at least it's not taking up your time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I was going to say, like, this is a big thing that I help a lot of my clients with, is like, because when we're bringing this back to our business and a lot of us are working from home, is that we have to establish boundaries in our mind that are like, okay, during my work hours are, you know, 9 to 5 or 10 to 6 or whatever, and I'm not doing laundry during work time. And if he does laundry, it's okay for him to do it his way. And so it's like creating boundaries and then sticking to your own boundaries and allowing whatever happens to be okay. It's like if he, right, like if he puts the dishes everywhere, okay. It's like, I think there's an element of like releasing control and letting go of whatever happens, and we'll deal with it. But like when you're bringing your brain to your business every day and setting those boundaries with the person that you love and the person that you live with, it's so important to be able to have those in your mind and know, okay, I know that laundry needs to get done. I know that grocery shopping has to happen, but I'm at work and I'm going to work on my work right here in this time. And it's okay if he does it. It's okay if he does it wrong. It's okay if he has thoughts and opinions about the fact that I'm working. This is my work time and my business is important. And valuing your time and your mental space as much as you value everyone else's is like one of the keys to like your business growth and having the business that you want to have.
Yeah, totally. And I think there's something too to the the learned helplessness of, so the first time that he unloaded the dishwasher, everything was all over the place because he's never done it before and he doesn't even know to care. But I bet if you continue to let him do it without intervention for a few months, all of a sudden he's going to start to be like, well, it doesn't really make sense to load the dishwasher this way, because actually what I've seen now that I've done it is bowls don't go face up. That makes no sense. And, like there's things like that we think, well, he'll never learn if I don't step in and tell him how to do it right, or criticize how he's doing it, or show him the light in my way. But actually it is like, don't let them continue being helpless. Like, let them learn the lessons that we learned, because we didn't come out of the box knowing how to load and unload a dishwasher. It was something we learned by doing. And I think, the pandemic has changed this dynamic about working from home for a lot of people, because now so many men who have and women who have been used to working in an office were forced to be at home. But I can remember when I first started working from home, which was now like 11 years ago, at the time, my husband, boyfriend at the time, now husband, he would come home and be like, well, you were home today. Why are there dishes in the sink? Or why didn't the laundry get done? And I think it's exactly what you're saying, Melanie, of like, because I hadn't established those boundaries. Like, yes, I was home, but I wasn't home twiddling my thumbs, or I wasn't home to do housework. I was home working. And I had to really set those boundaries in the beginning. And it's hard because I think we're so taught, especially as women, well, you give everything of yourself away, and, at the expense of your own self. And it was like, I was never going to create a successful business if I was stuck in that paradigm of thinking, well, I'm the woman and I'm at home, so I need to be taking care of this stuff instead of doing my actual work.
Yeah. And I just want to say that I feel like a lot of the time we put a ton of pressure on ourselves. Like, I remember, I invited over my partner's relatives and on a Friday night for dinner, and we had gone to their house for like Rosh Hashanah. So I'm used to like seeing them in this big kind of feast context. And so then the day before, the mom was like, hey, can we bring challah bread? Since it's Shabbat, she gets it every Friday. Like our daughter gets it every Friday. And I like freaked out. I was like, oh my God, wait, Shabbat dinner? Like, what exactly does that mean? What do I need to do? And I made this like elaborate like feast, and like was literally dripping with sweat by the time they got home. And my partner had worked late, so when he came in, I was like a dragon, like screaming at him because I had done all this work. And I think I feel like maybe during the dinner, the dad was like, oh wow, this is like so nice, like da da da, and he's like, we would have been happy with pizza. And I was just like smile grimacing, like, why did I do this to myself? So I think it's just remembering that we don't need to be perfect. We don't need to put as much pressure on ourselves that we do. And I think that that's kind of a part of undoing some of what we've learned, is just not getting so worked up to be kind of showing off this kind of perfect household or this perfect dinner. Like, I think we put a lot of pressure on ourselves because that's what society has told us to do. Like when my friends come over, I like freak out and I'm like cleaning, and it's just like, why? And it's just like, oh, well, I don't want them to think that we're just complete slobs. And also, I know that deep down, if they were going to judge someone for a messy home, it would be me. Not that they necessarily would, but just because, the house is the woman's domain, So just want to kind of point that out.
Yeah, that just reminds me of Mother's Day just passed last month, and my husband has a mother, and she's my mother-in-law, but I also have a mother, and I was like, I'm going to do my mom's Mother's Day, and you're going to do your mom's Mother's Day gift. And, lo and behold, it's Mother's Day. I'm like, what did you do for your mom? He's like, oh, I haven't done anything yet. I'm like, this reflects poorly on me. Look, now your mother is going to say, Kate didn't get her shit together to get this, and I'm like, it's even women doing it to each other, but it is like when you just said, deep down, we feel like it's a reflection on us, not on the couple as a whole, not on the family. And yeah, it is. There's still so much of that pressure placed on us. And I want to go back, Melanie, to what you shared about setting and maintaining boundaries. And I think this goes hand in hand with kind of how do we have success without overworking, and boundaries setting being a big piece of that. Can you talk both? I know we've talked kind of about boundaries at home, but how about boundaries in our business, and what kind of boundaries we can set to protect our own energy and time and selves and all of that.
Well, the way that I sort of think about it is like I establish at the beginning of the week, like, or even sometimes monthly, because I have a lot of projects going on, like how much time am I going to give a variety of things? And then I always plan my free time first so that I know I'm going to, that's part of my reward. The way that I think about it is like, but I don't mean just the weekend. I also mean I'm taking a free 30 minutes today to take myself for a walk or to go get myself a coffee or to just go take a nap. And so I think like, to me, hustle is not just the activities that we do in our business, it's a mindset. It's coming from anxiety and pressure to go faster and do more. And what I actually tell people to do is do less and constrain with more confidence.
Mm.
And so when we're thinking about like creating boundaries in your business, like I establish ahead of time, you know, what am I working on this week or this month? How much time am I willing to give it? And how much, you know, what are my red flags? Like if I'm working over 60 hours, that's a giant red flag. Like, oh, something has to change here. And I have to give myself the equivalent rest time if I worked too much. And so maybe that looks like if this week I'm intentionally working 60 hours because I'm working on a project, next week I have to take the equivalent time off that I took over just to get, because your body needs rest, your brain needs rest. Like the business, I say, like you are the asset of the business. It doesn't run without you.
Right.
If you aren't taking care of it, if you aren't maintaining your own boundaries, everything can fall apart really quickly and you can find yourself exhausted and in adrenal fatigue and like middle fingers up to the whole thing. And it's like, but that starts with the way that you're thinking about your time and about your energy and about success. And are you in a big hurry to get there? Are you doing a lot of busy work that won't actually help you get there? And like once you start like looking through your calendar and your to-do list and projects and priorities, is like we need to make sure that the first things that are happening are you taking care of yourself and the money-making activities.
Yeah. Why do you think rest and leisure time is an active act of defiance towards the patriarchy?
Oh, Lord.
Or maybe I should say, do you? I'm making assumptions.
I do.
But
I do. I have so much to say about this.
and
But
anyone
yeah,
else can jump in too.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, what we have been trained to believe is that our work is proof of our worth.
Mhm.
And so if we want to be worth more and to make more, we must work harder and work more. And that's why I see so many clients come to me who are like, yeah, sure, I want to make $1 million, but that's going to be a lot of work. That's going to take a lot out of me. And what they don't realize is actually the opposite is true, that constraining and creating a sustainable way to work is the way to make a lot more money. It's simplifying. But yeah, I mean, I think that the whole system is like, get to, especially for entrepreneurs. Like I've seen this meme that's like, haha, you thought entrepreneurship would mean more freedom. You just didn't realize that meant like every now and then you're going to be working till 3 a.m. every day, every night. And it's like, no, it doesn't have to be that way. But we are trained in this culture that that's what it's supposed to look like in order to be successful. And so prioritizing rest and prioritizing yourself and your body as an asset is an act of resistance in the face of that. Because I just don't think that the cultural norm is that we should rest. The cultural norm is no, you're supposed to get it. You're supposed to work harder. You're supposed to, and then glorify the hell out of how hard you worked in spite of it all. And I was successful, you know, in spite of everybody who thought I couldn't be because I worked so hard. And it's like, but to what end? You are not here to create a business to work yourself until you die. That
Right.
was not the point. What are we doing?
Right. At the expense of ourselves. Exactly. I mean, I have to stop myself even sometimes now and say, why are you doing this? What do you really want? You know, like if what you want is a certain lifestyle, then push your deadlines back, take time to rest. Like nothing is as urgent as we are taught to believe. I mean, everything is an emergency in the patriarchy. And it's like,
Mhm.
you have to do it now, or really you had to do it yesterday. And so now you're behind and you got to hustle, hustle, hustle. And I think I'd love to ask you this, Amée, because you focus so much on starting businesses. And I think I struggled with this when I was first starting my business too. And that you are not your business. It does not define your worth. But when you're just getting started, maybe you haven't even made any money yet. And I really was like, wow, well, I'm worth zero because my business is making zero. And it was really, really hard, especially if you go from like, I used to make X, I used to have this successful career working for somebody else, and now I'm nothing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and it's so all the feelings that come with all of that, right? Because you're like, okay, I need to pay bills. I need to make sure that, I'm not sinking here financially. I began to detach value from the dollars in the bank account with the, am I living with the purpose? Am I pursuing something that has meaning? Do I feel like my best gifts and talents are being utilized? Because it doesn't matter how much money you make if it doesn't have any fulfillment for you and you don't feel like you're actually doing something that makes you feel good. You can be paid $1 million to do a really lousy job and still feel like you're worthless and invaluable. But patience is really hard. And I know I've seen this also in, some of the group stuff that, we do together on Facebook and stuff where scarcity really does drive mindsets in the beginning, because sometimes we are attracted to the field of entrepreneurship because we're trying to solve a pain in our life. I mentioned that entrepreneurship can be a way of getting around the hurdles that exist for us professionally, which is why some women go into it. But then a lot of women also, and men, I won't just say this, people, we'll just use the people word to be inclusive here. A lot of people then feel a pinch, a pain, a lack of resource, a lack of time, whatever it may be. And they think that entrepreneurship tomorrow is going to deliver them to the glory land. And so then when they don't achieve it by tomorrow or next week or in 6 months, that just overwhelming feels of failure, land on top of them. And, entrepreneurship is a patient game. It's not an instantaneous, it's like winning the lottery, that just doesn't, it's 1 in a million or whatever statistic you want to look at. Hitting a home run at your first at bat also never happens. Occasionally somebody pulls it all off. But if you don't understand what's really driving you to reach out for this, your own self-employment and this own life that you see, and if it's not because you want to do something that gives you freedom and peace, but you're trying to solve scarcity and fear, it's going to be very frightening, especially when you can't solve that. And that's why I speak to that inner world first, which I know, Melanie and Rachel, we talk about that, with people that we work with, that you have to feel come back to safety. You have to feel safe. And if you feel like you're starting an entrepreneurship because you're in an unsafe place and you're trying to get safety, entrepreneurship is not going to make you safe. Entrepreneurship is frightening. It's scary. It's ups and downs. It's a roller coaster. It's amazing if you love roller coasters. It's sickening if you hate them.
Yeah. And sometimes both, all at the same time.
Right. And so, if you're going to go into the field of entrepreneurship, safety is the first thing you have to establish, whether that's emotional support safety or if it's financial safety, because the work itself is going to feel very unsafe for a while. And that's where, the resilience comes in. That's where saving money ahead of time before you get started so that you can handle not having, the income. And then one of the challenges that some people have, and in particular women do have, statistically shown, is not feeling comfortable with money to begin with.
Yeah.
And if you're going to go into entrepreneurship and you can't get comfortable with every dollar and cent coming in and out of your household, and that's one of those household labors that actually sometimes doesn't fall on women, but actually falls on men in relationships, paying the bills, running the money, having the bank account, asking for the money to pay the bills that need to be paid, not worrying about whether or not the insurance is being paid or the audio insurance or any of that other stuff. And that's got to be one of the first things that you really get a grasp on and be okay with. Because if you're not okay with your relationship with money and finances, you're going to be deferring those benefits, because that's part of the mindset of like, well, I'm just not making enough, so therefore I'm not going to put enough energy into it. You don't have a good relationship with money to begin with.
Mm-hmm.
You have given it no value in your life, and you haven't seen the possibilities and the potential for you. And I think that in the early stages, that's the first love affair that you have to have with the idea and the purpose you're going for. You have to love making money. And if you don't love making money, figure out why you don't love making money first, because you'll never make it. You'll push it off, you'll delay it, and you'll sabotage everything that you could be doing to get to it until you understand that.
Yeah. I mean, yes, there's so many students, even I know you've seen as a member of the Six Figure Blog Academy, that really struggle with that piece. I mean, we all struggle with the patience piece and, scarcity mindset, but I think there's a lot of women in my group in particular that, their husbands gave them permission to buy the course and are, maybe even have them on some type of allowance or some way of like, this is what you're allowed to spend on your business. And they're kind of in the driver's seat. And yeah, it's really painful to watch. And, it's like, I'm not going to step into your marriage and try to work this out for you, but it does feel like there's a lot of money mindset stuff. And I think it comes again back to what we've shared already of what are women taught? Women are not taught how to manage their finances. That is not something, that's just not something that we're raised doing. So
and that's the patriarchy right there.
Yeah, exactly.
That's the patriarchy right there. And that was one of the things that even as a business owner myself, I still played into that. I had a business partner who I say aloud, but convinced me I shouldn't be making the most money in the company, even though I was the CEO. And then I had a husband for a period of time when I started my own company, and I let him run the books for my business. And I never received a salary, and it was used as a manipulative tool. Like, well, the business is making this money, but we don't have enough to pay you. And so then it put me in, and I have like in my personal history, with the relationships, financial abuse, from being taught at a very early age that the work I did for the family was what I was supposed to do. And when I asked for an allowance, it wasn't allowed. We don't have money for that. We can't afford that. You just need to work anyways and not get paid. And believe it or not, people can start companies and still never believe that they're worth anything and they should be getting a paycheck for any of the work that they do, especially women, more so women, because of that messaging. And like I said, you can be a woman who can start a nationwide distributed manufacturing business and run it for 10 years and not get as much as what you should be because of playing out the patriarchy in your head. And then having that end up leading you to financial ruin, really, honestly.
So on the topic of money, I know, Rachel, this is something that you talk about on your feminist agenda. And I think toxic capitalism is something that we've really started to see a lot of. And Rachel, you started the episode self-identifying as a democratic socialist. And talking about how it's hard for these, you're also a capitalist though, and how do these identities coexist? And maybe it comes back again to like, because there's not black and white thinking and it's not either or. But can you share some of the most like important tenets from this, and how can we be both a socialist feminist or even a conscious capitalist?
Definitely. I think that one of the biggest things when it really comes down to is understanding that in our country, we worship capitalism. Unfortunately, it's basically a religion. And I think that we have to remember that millionaires, billionaires, it's near impossible to get to that point without the exploitation of others. And that's a huge problem. So I think that one of the biggest things that I focus on in my own business is that I treat my team members as if they were team members, as if they're people. They have children, they have hobbies, they have lives, and I ask them about those things, and I know their birthdays and their anniversaries, and I treat them like humans, and that has made us a stronger team because of that. I think it's also really important to be paying your team members, employees, or contractors ethically, making sure if you're using overseas labor that you're paying an ethical wage, for example. I think that it's just really important to remember that capitalism relies on the exploitation of others. And that's something that democratic socialists are vehemently against. So I think it's just really important to really make sure you're running your business in an ethical way that isn't going to be oppressing other people. So I think that's, for me, what it really comes down to is treating the people I work with like actual humans. For example, a company that's not doing that, Amazon, for example, and just making sure that they're being paid appropriately and for their worth. And one thing that I would, just like a kind of random business tip that's sort of related to this topic, is one thing I learned really quickly when I started out. I'm a service-based entrepreneur, is that hourly work, in my opinion, depending on the type of industry you're in, punishes efficiency. And so one of the things that I did in my business that really stabilized my finances was I stopped charging hourly, and instead I started charging monthly packages. And further than that, I made a pretty clear boundary that if you want to pay by check or whatever, you need to pay by this date. Otherwise, I have very, very strict, I think it's like 3% of the total amount per late day, which is very aggressive. But freelancers in America are owed millions and millions of dollars. And I was like, I refuse to have that happen to me. So I instead push all of my clients to do automatic billing, which is something that as a business owner, you can legally do. You can get their credit card information, their bank information, obviously securely. And you can take control over making sure you're getting paid. So just kind of to kind of tie all these topics together, we're talking about boundaries and things like that. For service-based entrepreneurs, it's so important to have like a welcome packet, for example, that outlines your boundaries, like your work hours. Like, no, I don't do texting. You can email me. You can schedule calls. But one of the biggest things that really made an impact on my business financially was automatic billing. And I had a client who, I think for 3 months in a row, they were late. It was actually a corporate hotel, so I don't know what was going on with that. And
always the people that should never be late that are like, really, come on.
Right. So I let them do checks because I wasn't as worried, because I knew that they had money. But for the 3rd month in a row, they were late, and I was finally like, okay, well, it's time to pull out my contract and start charging late fees. And so I ended up charging them, can't remember how many days late it was, but it totaled $800 in late fees. And so after I had finally gotten that check, I sent them an invoice and was like, oh, here's the charge for the late fees since, it was X number of days late. And they're like, what? And I'm like, yeah, it's in my contract. I did 2 months of grace with, reminders about our policy. And so what happened after that? They paid that, and then they immediately switched to credit card, which they somehow weren't able to do before, but now they could.
But that's interesting too, so I think a lot of women, myself included, would be afraid that if I send this, they're going to leave. They're not going like that will be the last bill they ever pay. But that was not the case.
Yeah, it's a really, obviously for me personally, it was a terrifying move. I was like, what if they're mad? Like, what if, but then I was just like, no, they signed a contract with these terms, and I need to push my authority. Like, it's a huge boss move to charge late fees. And I feel like as women, it's something that's really hard, like obviously it's situational. Like if someone's having life circumstances, obviously be flexible to that. But if they have the money and they're just kind of being lazy or just not setting up their schedule right, then you need to kind of make sure that you're getting paid on time. But ultimately, charging automatically just made it possible for me to actually have income I could depend on. And that really stabilized my business and helped me to flourish and get to my first 100,000 in revenue. So I think it's just really important to remember that sometimes maybe hourly work makes sense, but to me, that punishes how quickly you're working in a service-based industry.
Love it. Y'all want to share any thoughts you have about capitalism? And
well, I think, yeah, like it's an important topic, but I also think like a lot of women are so afraid to charge their worth and so afraid to charge for their services. And so they tend to give a lot of things away for free and think, well, but other people can't afford it, and I want to serve everybody. And I think like we forget that, yes, unfortunately, we live in this society where money is power. And that just is the way that it is right now. And if we want to change that, we have to make money and be able to give it away. Like we can't just give from an empty cup. Like I have a lot of clients come to me and they're like, okay, but what about the people who can't afford my services? And I'm like, okay, so always have something that you give for free that's already created that you can hand them. But you can't serve the masses at a big, high, super high level and give a lot away to the masses for free if you aren't also taking care of you and your company and your team. And
yeah,
so
it seems Sorry.
Yeah, we tend to think like, oh, well, I don't want to make money. It's not okay for me to make money. I don't want to charge too much for my things because then a lot of people can't afford it. And it's like, hold on, let's streamline that. Let's talk to the people who can afford it. Charge what you need to charge in order to build your business and in order to pay yourself and in order to pay your team and in order to be able then to give back to the community that you love and want to give back to and serve.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Seems like the definition of patriarchy in this context is like undercharge and over deliver. And that's what I see so many women in my groups doing. And yeah, it's just unlearning we deserve to be paid for our work.
And that's going to be hard because it's going to be deep rooted. Again, that's the grooming from day one, of kindness, compassion, collaboration, and those are not bad things, right? But they are what we're taught to do, to give of to our family first, right? And we spend the first several years of our life giving that to the family and and playing that role. So it's a deep rut in our brain, in our thinking, in our mindset that is very hard to overcome. And that fear of being rejected is the fear of, if you stood up in your family as the daughter or the girl and said something about it, how were you treated in response to it? And likely a woman with confidence who doesn't have that fear of being able to be assertive hasn't had the blowback blow up in her face. If that's not ladylike, boys aren't going to like you if you talk that way. No, you have to, like, this is what we do. This is how women behave. Whereas boys are never given those messages. And it allows them to just feel more entitled to everything because they've been told that they are, and so, it's, we have these 2 feet, right? Like, you guys are helping address the fact that the system, we all learned it. So we're all playing the role in the system. We're all actors in the theater, in the movie that we all hate right now, but we don't know how to stop that. So we have to realize that the system needs that awareness. And then each individual inside of it needs to walk off the stage, and move on with it. But it won't be easy. I mean, to me, for a person who has that, like, who's been through financial abuse, who's grown up with all of these, these messages and stuff, being aware I was replicating it, even though I didn't want to, it's a daily conscious effort. I'm terrified every time I have to say something. When somebody asked me yesterday, what's your fee for a half day? The first thing I felt was in my chest a shudder. Oh my God, if I give him the wrong answer, he won't hire me. And I know better. But the fear is such a deep root that it's going to be there for a while until the practice happens, and that you realize there are communities like, what Melanie does. There are people that will pay you for that. You have to believe you belong in that community with them. Yeah. And that it's not your job to take care of the world, even though somebody told you that was your job when you were little.
Yeah, and to Amée's point that she made earlier about paying yourself, it's so important to do that. And maybe in the beginning, you don't actually have the funds to pay yourself. You feel like you're just making ends meet. But once you're profitable, you have to prioritize paying yourself first. And I've been in business since 2015. It was only in, I think it was like September or October of last year, I was talking to a colleague. I was talking to her about my finances. Her name is actually Maggie, and she runs a company called Pep Talk Her. And she is just like so lovely. And she was like, you're making how much a month? She's like, you need to double your salary. And I was like, what? And she's like, you need to double your salary starting next month. And I was like, oh, okay. Because I had sort of a scarcity mindset, and I was like, oh, I need to like leave a lot of money in my business accounts in case something happened. But something happened, and I would lose clients, and then I would have to let go of team members. Like, it'd be like a ripple effect. It wouldn't be this big disaster. And so what I did is I doubled my salary. And what that enabled me to do is finally, this is a little embarrassing at 31, finally max out my Roth IRA for the first time, and to actually be able to set aside money for household savings, for future family. Like, it suddenly, it made me appreciate my business a lot more, because it was suddenly paying me what I was worth. And it's just like crazy, because like, it's my own company, so just don't be a martyr to your business. Yeah. Make sure that you're paying yourself first and taking care of your needs once you're profitable.
Hell yes. I'm over here clapping and cheering like, yes.
Yeah, don't be a martyr to your own business. I sadly was that exactly for several years and had the same experience. And it's like I was paying everybody else. I was taking care of everybody else. And then I'm doing all these income reports about what my business is making to show other women what's possible. But then what nobody saw is, but what was I taking home? It was like minimum wage. and then that's
Mhm.
again, going back to Melanie's point earlier of like, why am I doing this if not to take care of myself and create a life that works for me? So I did the same thing and finally doubled my salary and was like, okay, I'm going to pay myself a legitimate living wage and stop, like, because you start resenting people even though it's your choice. Like, it was my choice to pay my team instead of paying myself, but then I was resenting them and like, and it was like such a toxic environment then.
Well, and I think that's why it's so important that we as women have to talk about making money and talk about having money and talk about how much we're making and how much because that was why we went into this to begin with.
Right.
Like, yes, the freedom, but also to make money. And like, for me, it's to make money and to be able to give back to the political causes that I care so much about, to the nonprofits and the politicians. And like, I want to be able to move that needle on a national level. And so, yeah, we're talking about making a lot of money because we're talking about making a big difference. But if we have shame about it, or if we're doing things that make us then resent our business, why are we creating a business that we resent, or that we don't like working in, or that we have negative feelings about? That was not the point.
Right. Yeah. And that's a mantra for almost all of the last few years I've had to tell myself on a daily basis is the more money I make, the more good I can do in the world. Because I think we're so conditioned to feel like wanting money is selfish and greedy and all the other negative things. Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally.
So we kind of just touched on team, and I know we're coming up on the end here, but I'd love to just go a little bit deeper with building a team through this lens. How do we do it differently in this more feminist, equitable, inclusive way? Anybody have some practical tips they want to share?
Everybody's going to just jump in at the same time.
Yeah. Everyone's being too polite. Come on, ladies.
Well, so building a team in in this inclusive way, in an inclusive way, like one of the things that I did as a business consultant, just kind of, out of the range there is, we have so many unique experiences, but we also have so many unique behaviors and drives. And I think that going with intention of being able to align people to fit the role and the responsibility that you actually want. And that's another part of like a strategy that if you go back to this, a lot of entrepreneurs didn't go to business school. We earned our experience by working in a field in an industry, being exposed to it from the ground up and learning as we go. You hate journalism, right? Like that's where you came from. And so we do miss out on that. There are some strategic things that we can do from, a business perspective. And one of them would be to think about like, what does your organization look like? What is the outcome and the strategy you want this organization to do? Like, what are the services or the products you're giving out to it? And what kind of people will it take to be able to do that at the magnitude that you want? And, there are tools out there, that's one of the things that I work with companies on is then you decide or you understand what kind of person is going to thrive in that seat, because that's one of the things that we have to understand about ourselves is that, I'm a person who's big on visions. I can deal with changing situations, but, give me a task list of a lot of detailed work to do, and I want to poke my eyes out. While some people are really good at that, and then when you put them in ambiguous situations, they panic and freak and anxiety levels crop up. And so when you start to see that, like, my team needs people that can do this type of work, and I need people that can do this type of work, and then you go out with intention to recruit and attract the people that are going to fit into their seat the best, believe it or not, you actually end up with the strength of a team that's able to achieve the strategy that you want. And part of that is understanding that we are all different human beings. We all have different experiences. We all have different skills, and we all have different drives and needs that we are driven to do on a day-to-day basis. And I know that doesn't sound super sexy or anything like that, but we tend to organize companies, especially as we're building them as we go, without really thinking about whether or not the person who needs to do this work, like the social media coordinator, actually is going to be the person who's going to feel really good day in and day out about doing posts and content development and engaging and collaborating with people through the medium, we take it on ourselves, maybe because we have to, and then we don't think about the next person who needs to fill that role. And again, that level of strategic thinking early on, and you don't have all the answers. That's the other part of entrepreneurship, right? Day one, you have no idea. You're feeling your way through it. I call it swashbuckling, we're just kind of showing up. But at some point, you have to be able to set yourself down, and you have to be able to sit there and think like, I'm ready to take this next level. That's where coaches are wonderful for that, to be able to help get that alignment and to sit there and go, okay, now we're going to start thinking like a mogul. We're going to get out of our side hustle hobby mindset here. And now we're going to put our mogul cap on, and we're really going to crush this. And not everybody knows how to do that and has learned how to do that, but it's vital to be able to take that next step before you bring on other people, so that it has so much intention and power, and you can align everybody in the right role at the right time. So,
yeah.
Definitely. I think that one thing that I personally think is really important to understand about entrepreneurship is that if you want to grow and scale, you cannot do it alone. Like I don't know if I've heard of anyone who's been able to do it completely alone and get to a certain point. At some point, you will have to give up some control and figure out what you can delegate. And I'm a personal believer that anything that doesn't require your face or your brain or your specific skill set needs to be taken off your plate. And I think that one of the important things in building a team, like Amée was saying, is that when you are hiring people, to make sure that they're really a good fit for the type of work. One thing I do with my team is I check in maybe like once a quarter or at least a few times a year and just say, hey, like, how are you feeling about your tasks, about your workload, first off? And then how are you feeling about the tasks you're doing? Are there any that you're just really not into anymore? And just kind of like shuffling things around to make sure that everyone's happy with the work that they're doing. Because as an entrepreneur and as the boss, you have the power to do that. So I think that it's really critical to remember, and this is what I help folks with through coaching, is figuring out like, when does it make sense to have that first hire? What can I afford? And then how do I delegate? Because delegating is hard, especially if you're like a type A perfectionist who has a hard time releasing control. I know a lot of people identify with that. So I think it's just really critical to have someone to help guide you if you're really not sure. I kind of just floundered my way through it, but you don't have to do it alone. You are able to find resources like working with Melanie or myself to help you really figure out, how do I grow this business in a sustainable way that's going to allow me to still have the lifestyle I want. One of the decisions that I made pretty consciously is that I value kind of freedom in my day. And so I've delegated the vast majority of all of my work to my team members. I made the conscious choice to make less money so that I would actually have more freedom in my day, because that's what I wanted. I want to have a family. And when I do, I think I want to be a full-time mom and be working as well, because I live in DC. I don't want to pay $2,000 a month for someone else to watch my infant. And I think that, being able to know what's important to you in life is really critical. For some, maybe it is getting to that millionaire status, or it's being able to go on vacations with your family. It's figuring out what do you value and then building your business around that to support that lifestyle. And I think that's really important.
mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Melanie.
Well, and I'm in that place where next year I'll be hiring my own team. And right now I'm working with contractors. But I think, when I'm thinking about my business, I'm always looking for people who don't look like me, who don't have the same perspective as me. I love my white hetero friends, but I'm not going to necessarily hire them, because I want a wide range of perspectives and feedback to make sure that, I'm staying in my lane and being the person I actually want to be in my business and having the impact that I actually want to have. And I can't do that in the silo of people who look like me and who are just like me. And I think that, what you both said about delegating is so vital, because that is the one thing that we're like, wait, but I know exactly how to do this, exactly the way that I want it done. If I hand it to somebody else, they'll do it wrong. And part of our work as we're scaling and growing as entrepreneurs is to streamline our activities to exactly what Rachel just said. Like, if it doesn't need your face or your brain, you have to hand it to somebody else. And that might mean the discomfort of allowing that other person to make mistakes. And coming back in, just like with the dishwasher, like sometimes we have to teach them how to do how we want it done, or hand them some sort of manual for like, here's how I would like it done, and allow them the space to make mistakes and treat them like a human being. And ultimately what I teach my clients, like right at the beginning, is like, that has to start with the relationship that you have with yourself. Because if you are mean to yourself in your own mind, if you are harshly judging yourself all the time, if you are, beating yourself, to get to a goal, that's gonna flow out into everybody that works for you.
Mm-hmm.
It's just part of the mindset. And so your relationship with yourself and being on your own team and being a good boss to you is so absolutely vital, because it will dictate all the relationships that come after that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. One of my coaches recently just hosted this training on building a team. And she's like, step one, go to therapy. And yes, that is so true. I feel like I have had so much therapy just working on my own shit, because I'm going to project it onto everybody else that works for me.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Well, entrepreneurship is audacity. To be honest with you, we all woke up and said, I can do this. I've got a better way of doing this. And so I'm going to do this. Right. And that audacity to take that first step and to decide that you're going to be your own boss, you're going to start your own company, whatever it is also then, our greatest strength, but it also can be our greatest weakness, because that audacity then means that I only know how to do it my way. I don't need anybody else to do it. No one can possibly see this vision as well as I do. And why, entrepreneurs tend to, and I'm not making this a men or women thing. I mean, it's an entrepreneurial skill that makes it hard to bring in the help to do it, because, you have, and I'll just say this, you get this little thing and it's like, well, if somebody else could have done it, they would have done it already, and they didn't. And that's why I'm doing it. So obviously, I know. And you have to get in touch with that voice, because that voice is amazing, right? Because we need those voices out there of people that have the audacity to think that they can bring something new and fresh to the world that's needed out there. But the fear of bringing in the extra help and the dopamine hit that we feel like we need to get, the ego boost that we need to get, that is that inner world part. And the balance really is to learn how to be that person because you want to be, not because you need to be. And that was one of the first things that I learned through therapy, is sometimes we feel like we need to be on top because of survival. And through some sort of reinforcement, we needed to show that we could do those things in order to show our value to the world. That's how we got we received it. But when you can say that I want to be this person who's able to bring this company to life and these gifts to life, and I want to bring in the money to be able to pursue this even more, it's liberating, because you're not becoming more meek. You're not toning down. And people want to tell you to tone down. You're not toning yourself down, but you're definitely doing it in a way that feels more holistic and feel like in a more powerful space, rather than trying to receive the affirmations from the world, because you still feel inside of you there's something missing, and that's a powerful mindset shift, to go from hustling to, in it and in charge. So,
yeah. What a good note to end on. This has been so amazing. I feel like I could have this panel all day and never run out of things to talk about. But before we go, I'd like everybody to go around. We can start with you, Melanie, and tell people where they can find you and how they could work with you.
Yeah, absolutely. So my website is melaniechilders.com. And I also just recently launched a podcast called The Bad Bitch Entrepreneur that you can find on Apple, Google, and Spotify.
Love it. Rachel?
Yeah, so my website is feministfounder.com, and I can be found at Feminist Wynn, W-Y as in yellow, N as in Nancy, N as in Nancy, on social media. It's my last name. And I'll be working on, I'm going to have a landing page set up by the time this goes live, to have a kind of like a Success with Soul kind of bonus of being able to work with me on a sliding scale level. Accessibility is really important to me in my business, and I'd love to be able to, do a session with someone who was interested in something I said on the podcast, or just would like some guidance with a feminist framework. So it'll be feministfounder.com/success with soul.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Amée.
Cool. Yep. And so my website, you can find me is ameequiriconi.com, and I'm sure it's in the notes, so you don't have to spell it here. And then you can actually go to any retailer for books, bookshop.org, where you can support a local bookstore. You can go to the major online retailers. and get the Fearless Woman's Guide to Starting a Business. And even if you're in business already, I know Melanie's had a chance to read the book. This isn't a, how to build a business plan and how to come up with social media marketing. This is, everything I wish I'd learned and wish I knew when I started business that was going to matter most in success. And so that's an easy way of getting into my inner world and what I can do to help people. So. Oh, and I also have a podcast. I have a couple, but One Broken Mom is on all the podcast platforms. That's my mental health podcast. That's where I talk a lot about trauma and I interview experts and authors. And then I have the Fearless Woman's Guide to Business podcast, where I'm highlighting women that are great examples for other women to learn from and on their journey and stuff. So you can find me there.
And I've been on that podcast. So that
you
was
have.
fun. Yes. And
so is Melanie.
Yep.
All
right. Yep. So Rachel, you're next. All right. Thank you, ladies, so much.